At a certain point, you decided that you needed to leave the United States. You eventually made the decision that you needed to flee to Canada. How did that decision come about? This is in 1966, so this is at the height of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, would have been in November 1966. I was in Albany, Georgia at the time, and I had been out organizing in some of the counties. And when I got back to the SNCC office in Albany, Georgia, there was a letter waiting for me, a U.S. government letter. I opened it, and it read that I had been ordered to report for induction into the U.S. Armed Forces on such and such a day. I immediately wrote them a letter in response, basically saying, no way. And then weeks later, there was a SNCC staff meeting. Bob Moses and I was having lunch, and another young man by the name of Herman Carter came and joined us. I told Bob that I had been drafted, and Herman said he had been drafted as well. And Bob said, well, so have I. And Bob had said, well, I think we ought to try to find our way to Africa. First of all, we got to get out of the country, so we'll go to Canada. From Canada, we'll try and find our way to Africa. That's how that decision was made. And of course, we didn't know a lot about Canada at all. We knew some of the things about the Underground Railroad and, the role that Canada had played, and how some of the slaves, including Harriet Tubman and others, had found their way to Canada.
So it's the middle of winter. You're 19 years old. You arrive in a new country, a new city. What were those first couple of days and weeks like for you, living in this new environment?
I lived in the heart of what was Little Burgundy, which was the center of the Black community in Montreal. It was a new experience. It was a fascinating community that took us in. There was a lot to learn and prevailing longing for home.
You also had to make some pretty significant changes. You assumed a new identity. You became Clifford Gaston.
Mm-hmm.
How come?
First of all, we were being sought by the FBI for being draft resistors and also for our participation in the civil rights movement. And so we basically had to go underground and assume new identities because we were here illegally. So there was always a chance of being apprehended and deported. So we had to come up with new identities. I chose Clifford Gaston, and I say lamely, because he was my best childhood friend that I grew up with. In retrospect, not a very smart decision, because if you're trying to lay low and not being discovered, why leave a trail or breadcrumb as obvious as your childhood friend's name?
I'm wondering what it was like for you to have to live with a name that wasn't yours and to basically pretend that you were somebody else and present yourself in a way that wasn't truly yourself for what? It was over a decade. In terms of just the relationships that you were building, people, of course, want to know who you are. They want to know the real you. They want to feel that they can trust you. And part of that trust is being sure that you are who you say you are. So I'm wondering the effect that it must have had on you and the relationships that you forged during that time.
It was very difficult because you had to keep a consistent narrative about who you become. It took a while to have the local experiences and the knowledge of the history and the terrain so that you could square what you were saying to people with your new experiences. People sometimes could obviously see gaps. People could see a reticence that you would have, a reluctance to speak about yourself in any detail. So obviously some people would withdraw or cease contact because they didn't find what you were saying believable.
Someone who really brought you into his circle was the remarkable intellectual, kind of a commissar, Alfie Roberts. Tell us a little bit about who Alfie was and your relationship with him.
I first came in contact with Alfie through George, who was the owner of Argo Bookshop on St. Catherine Street, downtown Montreal. I went in and I asked Mr. George, who are some of the local and Canadian Black authors that I should be reading? He gave me a few names, and then he gave me a slip of paper that had the phone number for Alfie Roberts. And I called Alfie, and we just hit it off. He started to talk books. He suggested a reading list of Black Canadian authors and African authors and Caribbean authors. And then Alfie and I would meet every Saturday morning, and we would do the rounds of the bookshops. And then he would invite me to his home, and he would invite me especially when a Caribbean author was in town.
Because Alfie was this incredibly connected person. He was maybe more connected to the African diaspora than maybe anyone in Montreal, and the Caribbean diaspora.
Absolutely.
And I say this also as someone who was mentored by Alfie. Someone who was mentored even much more than I is the author David Austin, the author of Fear of a Black Nation, who Alfie really took under his wing and treated like a son.
Right. Well, I met the great C.L.R. James, the incredible Pan-Africanist and historian, novelist, philosopher at Alfred's place. I met Garrett Walcott,
Nobel Prize winner,
at Alfie's place. I met Samuel Selvon,
brilliant novelist,
Wilson Harris,
Guyanese,
yeah,
intellectual,
yeah.
You met Orlando Patterson as well.
I met Orlando Patterson at
the Harvard sociologist.
Yeah.
Andrew Salke.
Yes. Yep.
George Lamming, the Barbadian novelist.
Incredible.
Kamal Brathwaite as well.
Yeah, incredible.
And then, of course, the author of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, one of the seminal texts of the last 100 years, Walter Rodney. You met all of those at Alfie's house.
I met all those people at Alfie's house.
Incredible.
Yep. You can't get any better than that.
You've been listening to a clip of In Bed with the Elephant with me, your host, Adrian Harewood. Be sure to check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast and write a review. We love hearing from you.